This is Matthew Cratter from Bitcoin University, and today I wanted to talk about how Bitcoin fixes big government. One way we might define big government is government that has a huge impact on the economy because it's a large percentage of GDP spending. We can see over the past few years that federal spending as a percentage of GDP has been somewhere between 20 and 30%. And I would say that that is a sign that your government is too big if it has that kind of large impact on the economy. So how is big government funded in the fiat era? Mostly not through taxes, which a lot of people don't realize. And this is because raising taxes is hard political work. It gets people angry. By contrast, revving up the money printers is effortless. What happens is the Fed prints up new money. It buys U.S. debt that's issued by the U.S. Treasury. There are some intermediaries, some banks are in the middle of that. But the essential thing that happens is there are more U.S. dollars printed up, and they're used to monetize U.S. deficit spending at the federal level. This is what we call revving up the money printers. No one knows that it's even going on because you're not taught this in government schools. In other words, in public schools, instead you're taught Keynesian economics, where this idea of the government spending huge amounts of money is a good thing and is portrayed as a good thing when in fact it is not. So why is big government even a problem? It's a problem because when government spending becomes a large percentage of the economy, as we've shown, people learn that they can co-opt the government to solve their own particular problems. Now, why is this a bad thing? This is a bad thing because it makes everything so political, and it further draws the government into every aspect of our lives. And everyone becomes incentivized when you have a large, centralized, powerful government. Everyone becomes incentivized to use the government as a hammer against their enemies or as a slush fund for their projects. So for example, you might have a new medical treatment that you like to try out on people. Just get the government to require it in order to attend work or schools. We see this kind of government overreach everywhere. So for example, the US government subsidizes a lot of these agricultural commodities, in particular corn, soy, and wheat. And then the same government, a different department, magically comes out with a food guide that pushes those same foods. I'll link to this article in the description notes below about U.S. agricultural subsidies and how the most highly subsidized crops, corn, soy, wheat, and rice, are the most abundantly produced and most consumed, often in the form of ultra-processed foods. Here's the U.S. food pyramid, which came out in 1992, and the base of the pyramid, as everyone knows, was mostly grains, because this is what the U.S. produces a lot of, because the U.S. government helps to subsidize prices and keep them unnaturally low. When you have fiat money, you end up with fiat food, fiat health, and fiat politicians who show the effects of the food. It's beyond me why anyone would nominate someone like this to be a minister of health when they don't even know how to take care of themselves. Here's the thing, I couldn't care less about what the government or its employees think about health, about medicine, nutrition, drugs, whatever you want to mean by that, science, parenting, education, art, or really anything else. I just don't care the government's opinion because the government can't even figure out how to run the post office and can't even figure out how to stop there being potholes in the road. But strangely, in this fiat era, so many people do care what the government thinks, and they care for two reasons. One, because they want to weaponize the government and use them for their own projects, or two, because they're victims of government education and or government media sponsored psychological operations, or psyops. One of the biggest ones, of course, is renewable energy, as we've spoken about on this channel. I love this tweet thread from Safe. I'll just read the first two tweets. Bitcoin fixes renewables by bankrupting all fiat governments that subsidize electricity from intermittent sources. These are sources that go on and off. For example, the sun sets, so you can't use solar at night. The wind stops blowing, you can't use wind. And this is a very difficult way to run a grid when you have intermittent sources. In fact, it's impossible to run an electrical grid using this. Instead, you need to have some natural gas peaking plants, and you probably need to have nuclear. You cannot run a grid solely on intermittent sources. And so SAFE goes on to say, forcing TV watching virtue signalers to come to terms with thermodynamic reality, a choice of hydrocarbons, and I would also add nuclear there, versus cold, darkness, poverty, primitiveness, and early death. Wind and solar are unpredictable and intermittent, so no sane engineer would ever connect them to an electric grid, whose entire point is to provide reliable power regardless of weather. only fiat makes this insanity possible, and I think Safe is right about that. Another area is, of course, the military-industrial complex. If the U.S. government had to pay for its forever wars, especially as we've seen over the past 20 years, with actual tax revenue rather than just printing up the money, there would be a lot less war. This estimate from Brown University estimates that the war on terror cost approximately $8 trillion, and I'll link to the breakdown below. That's a lot of money when you consider that the U.S. national debt is 33 trillion. And this was a war that most people did not fight in, and most people did not even think they were paying for, but it was paid for by the Fed monetizing deficit spending. By contrast, under a Bitcoin standard, governments will need to persuade or force you, and that's easier said than done. It's very difficult to force someone to give you their Bitcoin, but governments will need to persuade or force you to give them some Bitcoin to fund their operations. And if the government wants to print up some more Bitcoin, in other words, print up some more money, it will need to mine Bitcoin just like anyone else, or provide valuable goods and services in exchange for it. It won't just be able to print up fiat and steal from savers through a stealth inflation tax. So Bitcoin fixes government overreach and big government by helping to defund it. There's nothing wrong with government at the most basic level. It's nice to have some power that protects the weak from the evil and strong, but the problem is, certainly now we can all agree that the governments have gotten much too large, and they've become large because they're able to rely on fiat funding. So Bitcoin fixes government overreach by defunding it. If the people decide that something is worth doing, they will choose to fund it. But bureaucrats won't be able to fund non-economically smart projects or projects that the people don't want simply by diluting savers through money printing and collaborating with the central bank. The size of government and its oversized impact on the economy will shrink, and no longer will every fight or quarrel be escalated to the political level, simply because there won't be enough money at the political level to weaponize the U.S. government against your own enemies or treat it as your own private slush fund for your business. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that subscribe and like buttons. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I publish my next video. And let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.